Hello, I hope you're doing well. Today I want to talk about yarn, and I apologise for how casually I'm presenting this video to you. To be honest, I've had a bit of a mental block with filming this video because it's a massive topic and I don't feel like I'm enough of an expert to speak on it, but I also don't think that I will ever feel like I'm enough of an expert to tell you all about yarn. I don't think that in my entire life I will get around to knitting with every fibre and be able to give you solid advice on everything. But I've been knitting pretty seriously for 18 months now, and I certainly know a lot more than I did when I first started. And I kind of want to make this video for my past self because I remember when I first started knitting, I'd picked up some yarn from a craft store and I'd made a scarf and I'd made a hat. Then I wanted to make myself a sweater, so I found a pattern on Etsy, just a random pattern with some good reviews. I bought the pattern, I then bought the needles that the pattern recommended, and then when it came to buying the yarn, I was so overwhelmed. I didn't understand anything. There were so many choices. I think I just went on a yarn website like Wool Warehouse or Lovecrafts or something, and immediately I was just lost with how many options there are. I didn't understand any of the terminology, what any of the words meant. I think the pattern that I had bought either used quite expensive yarn or yarn that wasn't available for me to buy in my country, and so I was having to substitute the recommended yarn in the pattern for something else, and I really felt completely out of my depth. In fact, trying to understand yarn was a large part of the reason why I started watching knitting podcasts on YouTube, which led to me becoming a knitting YouTuber myself, because I just wanted to hear about all the yarns that people were using and the pros and cons of each, like why people were choosing to use all these specific yarns. So I'm going to try and impart all of the knowledge that I've learned so far over to you in case it's useful. There are definitely people that know more than me. If you're a person that knows more than me, please leave a comment with any of your extra knowledge. Maybe we can make this a bit of a useful resource for people starting out. And then maybe in a year or two's time I can do a follow-up video with all I've learned since now. But right now I can distinctly remember where my head was at when I first started, and I remember all the questions that I had at the time. So I'm coming from the future to answer my own questions, and they're probably going to be a lot of other people's questions as well, because the world of knitting and crochet can be big and overwhelming. So first, let's run through yarn weights. Now, yarn weights refer directly to the thickness of a yarn, and there are a few different ways of measuring a yarn weight. There's a most popular terminology. So from thin to thick, you have lace weight yarn. This is sometimes known as 1 or 2 ply yarn. The ply refers to the amount of little mini yarns wrapped around each other to make the big yarn. Then after lace weight yarn, there is fingering weight yarn. This is sometimes also known as 4 ply yarn, but Hobby and Søstrene Gren both have fingering weight cottons and they call them 8/4 cotton. Then after fingering weight yarn, you have sport weight yarn. This isn't a very common weight of yarn. There's not that many sport weight patterns. It's kind of in between fingering weight and the one above it. Most patterns will use fingering weight or the one above it. Then you have DK weight yarn. DK stands for double knitting. This sometimes is called 8 ply. Hobby has a cotton that's 8-6. That's a DK weight yarn. DK weight yarn is normally knitted on about 4 or 5 millimeter needles for reference. Then above DK weight yarn, you've got worsted weight yarn knitted on 5 to 8 millimeter needles. Worsted weight yarn is sometimes called Aran weight yarn. And then there are thicker yarns available past worsted weight, but you won't tend to work with them unless you're specifically looking to make a very chunky or bulky item. I think after that it goes bulky and super bulky. I'm not sure. I very rarely work with those yarns. So most patterns, most things that you would want to knit are in fingering weight, DK weight, or worsted weight. There is some sort of equivalence between them. For instance, if you hold 2 strands of a fingering weight yarn together, you will get roughly a DK weight yarn, but obviously not all yarns are created equally. For instance, a lot of worsted weight sweater patterns will recommend that you hold 1 fingering weight yarn together with a strand of mohair, which is technically lace weight, but mohair, I can show you actually. Mohair is very fluffy. So although the very core of the yarn is super thin, it's got this big fluffy halo around it, meaning that if you hold it together with a fingering weight non-fluffy yarn, you can work up a worsted weight pattern. If you're looking to substitute yarn that you see in a pattern, I would say the best way to do this is look at gauge. So a pattern will always tell you to do a gauge swatch, meaning that you knit a sample square of your yarn and your needles, then you give it a little wash, you let it dry out. The washing and drying out is very important because wools can really change size after washing. And you can measure how many stitches are in your little gauge square and see if it corresponds to what the pattern suggests. I'm at the point now where I can look at the thickness of a yarn and guess whether it's DK, worsted or fingering weight yarn. But if you're not yet at that stage, you can normally tell by looking at how many meters per 50 gram ball there are. So DK weight yarn tends to be about 100 to 120 meters per 50 gram ball. Fingering weight will be 150 meters to 200, maybe 220 meters per 50 gram ball. And then worsted weight will be on the other side of that, so less than 100 meters per 50 gram ball. There are exceptions to this though, because some yarns are very, very light. For instance, this is a blown yarn, so it's very airy, basically. There's a lot of air in the middle, it's very fluffy. And this is a worsted weight yarn, but it is also 150 meters per 50 gram ball. However, if you look at the label, it will also tell you what you should expect to see when you do a sample swatch. So that is a better indicator of what the weight of this is. So it's saying here that the recommended needle size is 5mm or 6mm, so that tells me it's a worsted weight yarn. This is a fingering weight yarn, and as you can see, it still has the information on the side there, and it says to work this up with 3.5mm needles. So that's how I know it's a fingering weight yarn. For the most part, yarn websites do tend to organize the yarns by weight. So if you are looking to substitute the recommended yarn on a pattern, you can look on the website, look at the recommended gauge in the description, see if it matches the recommended gauge in the pattern. At least roughly, you can always size up your needles or size down your needles after you do your swatch and you realise you're just a little bit off, but you want to be in that range. I guess I also want to mention on the subject of yarn websites and yarn stores, because this is advice that I would give my younger self, is I would recommend not shopping in store, at least like where I live in the UK. The yarn stores that I've been to in the UK sort of exist on either ends of a spectrum with nothing in the middle, where there are yarn stores that have very affordable yarn, mostly acrylic, and I think it's mostly catered to an older audience looking to knit stuff for babies. Like, they'll have floor to ceiling yarns but not that much selection available, and especially very few natural fibres. Or there are the luxury yarn stores where they're a wonderful shopping experience and you can ask the cashiers for so much help and they will tell you everything you need to know and recommend loads of stuff to you, and they'll be very helpful, but they also don't stock anything affordable. So you'll be spending, like, I don't know, if you're making a sweater, 50 or 100 pounds on this luxury yarn. And I have to say that if you are making your very first sweater, it's maybe not the best idea to be spending that amount of money, because if it's your very first time, you do have a lot left to learn, and this is certainly true for me. As like, my first garments weren't wearable, I still had so much to learn, and I'm very glad that I wasn't using extremely expensive materials to make them. Of course, you always can unravel your sweaters. Also, if it was very expensive yarn, you can reuse it. That is a possibility. There are good quality, less expensive yarns available. It's just that if you are in most of the UK, you do have to buy them online. I know this certainly isn't true for every country. For instance, I've been to Poland recently, and the yarn stores there had a great selection of very affordable, good quality yarns. So it really does depend where you are. Before I move on to the meat of this video, which is going to be talking about yarn fibres, I just want to take a moment to tell you about the sponsor of this video, which is Bob and Brad. This is actually my second time working with Bob and Brad. The first time was to promote their back massager pillow, which I actually keep beside my bed. I'll show you it. This thing, this back massager that you plug in and it massages your back. I've had this for like 2 months now, and it's actually one of my most prized possessions. That when I was moving back from Berlin last month, I had so much luggage. I had a box shipped back to the UK, I had a checked-in suitcase. This went in my carry-on and it took up like half the suitcase, but I couldn't bear for something to happen to it. But today I want to show you another one of Bob and Brad's products, which is this. This is the Eye Oasis 2 Plus. This is an eye massager, which is something that I did not know I would get this much use out of as I have. It's been an absolute pleasure to try out. So this is a rechargeable electric eye massager. You turn it on with the buttons on the side. It also comes with a remote so you can play with the settings while you're wearing it. So this has air pressure massage functions, heat and soothing music. There is very subtle air pressure massage happening on the inside. I don't even know if you'll be able to see the massage happening, but it feels amazing. When I go for a massage, my favorite part is when they massage your face and your head and your scalp and they give you a nice little temple massage here. This does exactly that and goes all the way around your eyes. And for me, after I use this, it feels similar to when I've used a gua sha to do like my facial release around this part of my face. It's really relaxing, and I've been using this in conjunction with my meditation practice. So I used to really struggle to get to sleep when I was younger, and over the years I've learned a few ways to cope and ways to help myself fall asleep faster, and the main one honestly is meditating for like 10-15 minutes before I try and fall asleep. But sometimes it's just so hard to put down my phone and stop scrolling. So this has really helped me because this has a 15-minute timer, it has relaxing meditation spa music options. It gives me a little massage. I do my meditation. Obviously I can't look at my phone while I've got this on, and then I fall asleep so quickly afterwards. So if you're interested in trying this out for yourself, I'll leave a link to it in the description, and thanks again to Bob and Brad for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about fibre. This is a big topic. I guess maybe I'll start by acknowledging that I'm not really going to talk about synthetic fibres in this video because they are not my personal preference, and I would encourage most people to not view synthetic fibres as the default for knitting or crochet either. I understand there are reasons why certain people would want to knit with 100% synthetic fibres over natural fibres, like severe allergies for instance, but for me personally I don't want anything to do with 100% synthetic fibres. I think I dislike them mainly for the reason that if I'm going to be spending like 30 or 40 hours making something, I don't want it to be made of the same stuff as something I could be buying for under £10 in Primark or Shein. Like acrylic sweaters just aren't worth very much, but wool sweaters, even like not that well made or not that high quality wool sweaters, can't be bought for cheap, at least not firsthand. I also have heard some people complain about the itchiness of wool and saying that acrylic's not itchy, but personally I've found some acrylic sweaters to be very itchy and some wool sweaters to be completely not itchy. So it really does depend on like the subtype or the quality of the fibre on whether or not something is itchy. So if we're avoiding synthetic fibres, let's start talking about animal fibres. So one thing that all animal fibres have in common is that they are going to stretch when you first wash them. Some animal fibres can stretch a small amount, some can stretch a large amount. You're only really going to know how much something stretches by doing a gauge swatch, measuring it before you give it a little wash, just like under the tap, get it wet and then dry it flat, and then measuring it again and seeing what the difference is. As a rule, when I tend to knit sweaters made out of animal fibres, like I'm stopping the sleeve about here because I know it's going to grow to about here, and same for the body. Like animal fibres do tend to relax an awful lot. Most animal fibres also tend to be hand wash only. I always wash my knits on the hand wash cycle of my washing machine and I've never had an issue. Long may that continue. There is a type of wool available called superwash treated wool, and this can be machine washed. So a lot of yarns that call themselves sock yarns will be superwashed, or a lot of yarns that will say that they're good for kids' clothes will also be superwashed, meaning that you can just throw them in the washing machine and not worry about it. I still wouldn't put them on like a 60-degree cycle, maybe a 40-degree, but in my experience, all superwash wools tend to stretch more than non-superwash wools. The first sweater that I ever knitted, that was a superwash wool, and I didn't know about blocking, that you're meant to like give your garment a little hand wash after you finish making it to see like the actual finished size, and it changed shape completely. Like it was like a figure hugging sweater, and then it became like a baggy sweater. On the subject of sock yarns tend to be called that because they are wool mixed with about 25% polyamide or nylon. Socks need to be quite hard wearing so that they don't get holes through the heel and the toe, so that's why it'll have that 25% synthetic content that will give it a little bit of structure. Now there are lots of different types of wool out there. For me personally, if I'm looking to knit with something that's 100% wool, I will always be looking for merino wool. That, in my experience, is the softest type of wool. I have very sensitive skin and it can tolerate merino wool, but if a ball of yarn just says wool on it, or something like Peruvian Highland wool, or this wool or that wool but not merino wool, I tend to steer clear of it. Merino wool tends to be a lot smoother and silkier in the feeling. I hope you can see what I mean here. So this is just 100% wool, and it certainly looks woolly, like it's just thick, quite coarse wool. And this is merino wool. So at least to my eye, I can see that it's shiny, it's a lot less fluffy, and this is what I will choose to work with any day of the week. Outside of sheep's wool, there are so many other types of animal fibers. I haven't knitted with most, so I can't give you any personal opinions about cashmere, although I've heard from other people, like, beautifully soft, but it does pill easily, so you have to take a lot of care to maintain your garments. Yak, I've heard, is extremely soft. I recently saw camel wool for the first time. That's really intriguing. And there's also Angora, which I think is made from rabbits, and it's very, very fluffy. The few other animal fibers that I can speak about are alpaca and mohair. So mohair is made from goats. I've got an example for some mohair here. This is actually called kid silk, and this is 72% mohair, 25% silk. It's quite common that mohair is mixed with silk, and this is very popular to work with at the moment. I've seen a lot of people knitting this with very large needles, and as this is a very thin yarn, that gives like a wholly loose sheer effect, and it is a beautiful texture. What I will say is that this can feel really soft in the bowl, but for me personally, I find this very itchy once it's against my skin. So when I want to get the beautiful fluffy effect of mohair, I tend to use brushed alpaca silk instead. So this is an example of some brushed alpaca silk, and if I just compare it to the mohair, you can see they are very, very similar, but the alpaca silk is a bit thicker. And this is a prime example of what I mean by yarn weights sometimes being a bit tricky, because this mohair is classified as a lace weight yarn, and this brushed alpaca silk is classified as a worsted weight yarn. So complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but you can kind of use them interchangeably. It's just that this will be a slightly thicker fabric. This brushed alpaca silk is from Drops. It's very affordable. Mohairs can be quite expensive, but Drops brushed alpaca silk is like, I think £3 a ball, and a ball goes a very long way. I made a cardigan with 5 balls of it. Actually, if you want to know my opinions on more like very specific yarns, I did make a video in January called like tier ranking every yarn that I knitted with in 2024. I plan on doing another one at the end of 2025 as well. Oh, here I actually have a gauge swatch of 2 strands of the brushed alpaca silk held together. So this creates a worsted weight yarn, 2 strands of this brushed alpaca silk. And as you can see, super fluffy, super like nice to work with, really nice sweater material. This stretches a lot with blocking. And in my experience, I would say that is true for all alpaca. There are loads of other kinds of alpaca as well as brushed alpaca. So you can just get normal alpaca yarn. This is some alpaca fingering weight yarn. It looks basically the same as normal sheep's wool does. And this is Suri alpaca. So this looks similar to the brushed alpaca silk, except it is even thicker. This, as you can see, is very, very fluffy. And maybe I can give you another example of how different worsted weight yarns can look. So these are 3 different worsted weight yarns. They're all animal fibers, but as you can see, you will end up with a completely different garment if you chose to knit any of these for a sweater. This is some Suri alpaca, this is the plain wool, and this is actually a blown yarn. This is one of my favourite materials to make sweaters with, because I find that this blown yarn works really well with my sensitive skin. So this exact yarn, this is Hobby Divina, and this is a blend of 65% alpaca, 28% polyamide and 7% wool. And it is very, very soft and very, very squishy. While the yarn is thick, it has a lot of air in it. So you use quite big needles for this, like 6mm needles, but you end up with a very light sweater. I've actually got a very good example of lots of different yarns being used together. So this is a cardigan that I knitted on 5mm needles. and I'll talk you through everything that I used. So this is meant to be worsted weight. This is the blown alpaca yarn that I just showed you, held together with a strand of mohair. This is just the blown yarn, and so is the blue. I have just a strand of mohair. As you can see, it's very thin, so it's quite holey there. And then at the top here, I have a fingering weight alpaca held together with a mohair. So although I am technically holding a worsted weight yarn with a mohair here, and then a fingering weight yarn with a mohair here, they work to the same gauge because this blown yarn has so much wiggle room. It can really condense down. And you can see, if I maybe hold it further away, the red section there where my yarn combination is thinner, it is a thinner fabric, like you can see through it, but you can't see through the pink there. And the fact that I can combine all of these different yarns together and end up with something that looks semi-cohesive is something that probably would have blown my mind when I first started knitting. I feel like I should have more to say about animal fibres, but for the life of me, I can't remember anymore. Now that I've tried a few different yarn types, I do have my favourites that I will gravitate towards again and again. For instance, these blown yarns I will continue to make sweaters with, but maybe not so much other garments that require more structure, because there isn't the structure in the yarn to give it. Like, I made a hat out of one of these ones and it just couldn't keep its shape at all. If I'm looking for something with a bit more structure, I will tend to go for a fingering weight merino wool held together with a strand of mohair or brushed alpaca silk. And if I'm looking to make a sweater that isn't at all fluffy, I will just use 100% merino wool like I did here. This is a DK wet sweater and I knitted this by holding 2 strands of fingering weight merino wool together, and this creates like a really nice non-fluffy fabric. So next we've got to talk about plant fibres. Similarly to animal fibres, there are so many plant fibres available, and of course I haven't tried them all. You've got cotton and linen and viscose, silk, rayon, bamboo. I'm sure there's more than that, and then you've also got like combinations of those. I think silk actually does exist in a realm of its own. Like, it's not technically, it's not plant fibre, but it also doesn't behave like an animal fibre. Silk yarn does tend to be very expensive. I've never knitted with 100% silk. You would choose silk because it has such a beautiful shine and a beautiful drape to the fabric, and it's also a very good fibre to wear year round. Silk is good in hot weather and in cold. I guess I should have said with animal fibres, although maybe this is common knowledge, they tend to work better for cold weather clothing. I know that some people in very hot countries do wear merino wool as an insulating layer, but I think that that clothing is much thinner than anything that you could hand knit, and that any clothes that you knit with animal fibres, because they're a little bit bulkier, they will keep the heat in quite well. I love wearing wool sweaters in the winter. I think after almost an entire lifetime of wearing store-bought acrylic sweaters, you can really feel the difference with how much less sweaty you get, but how much warmer you stay. Somehow it just manages to do both, and that's another reason why I don't want to knit with acrylic. So for every other fibre other than silk, they tend to have a few properties in common. Mainly that they do tend to be machine washable more often than not, and that they won't really stretch after you block them. I have knitted a few tops out of plant fibres, including cotton, cotton, linen, viscose blends, and every time that I have given them their first wash, when I've blocked them, they have dried to stay exactly the same shape as they were before I washed them. Cotton by itself can be treated so many different ways and used for so many different purposes that I can't even begin to cover them all. It can be a very, very affordable fibre to buy, but what you might notice when looking at patterns and looking at what other people are making, people tend to crochet with 100% cotton a lot more than they knit with 100% cotton. And I think a main reason for that is because crocheting with 100% cotton doesn't really hurt your hands, but knitting with 100% cotton does tend to. Cotton has little to no stretch in it, meaning that it can hurt your hands to work with it for a while. I don't have too many examples of 100% cotton linens to show you, but I do have two that I think can illustrate how different cotton can look. So both of these are just 100% cotton. They're not mercerized cotton, they're nothing like that. This is just some fingering weight cotton yarn. This is the 8/4 from Sister and Gren that I mentioned earlier, and I crocheted this top with this. This was affordable to buy and easy to work with, and I fully enjoyed my experience with this. This is another type of cotton yarn. This is Isea Japansk Bemold. As you can see, it's just got a completely different structure to it. It's like the yarn itself is in the shape of a ribbon, and I made a bag with this. Unfortunately, this wasn't the best yarn to make this bag with. It does stretch a little bit. I need to put a lining in this so that doesn't keep happening. Overall, I would say cotton's a pretty great all-rounder, no matter what you want to make with it. Just be prepared to potentially have your hands hurt if you're knitting with it. One thing that you might want to watch out for when you're buying plant fibres is how splitty the yarn is. This is one of the main things that can make knitting with natural fibres quite tricky. So this is Drop Spell, which is a cotton linen viscose blend, and as you can see, I can just sort of like pick apart the fibres within the yarn really easily. And you can only see this when you're viewing a yarn in person, but if you look on Ravelry and look at other people's projects made with the yarn, people do tend to mention it if it's a big issue, but I can just unravel this, untwist this, and this isn't a big issue. You can still knit with this, you can still crochet with this, but sometimes your knitting needles can get stuck like in the middle of the string, which can be quite frustrating. But that is the main pitfall that I personally have had with some plant fibres. The plant fibre that I will tend to move towards whenever I'm choosing something to knit with is a cotton linen viscose blend. Drop Spell that I just showed you, that's a little bit splitty, is a DK example of this. That's like £1.80 a ball, so really affordable. Hobby Seashell is a fingering weight example of it. That is actually not splitty at all and an absolute dream to work with. And I also have this top to show you what the actual fabric looks like. This was knitted with King Cole Linendale, which was also a little bit splitty. It feels very similar to cotton, but I don't have any of the issues with it hurting my hands when I knit with it that I do with cotton. The stitches are very defined, so it's not super forgiving if you make a little mistake. For instance, like I think you can see any extra strands poking out there, and the join where I did this strap, that is more notable than it may be with other fibres. But that sort of thing really doesn't bother me, and I love this fibre. There are also yarns available that are a mix of animal fibres and plant fibres. I know Knitting for Olive is a really popular brand. I recently made a top with their cotton merino, which is 70% cotton, 30% merino wool. And I used to not really understand where those yarns belonged, what they should be used for, but they do just exist in the middle. If you made a sweater or a top that is a mix of cotton and wool, that would be like a nice light spring or autumn sweater. Adding the merino also gets rid of the pain issues that I mentioned that you get with 100% cotton. I have heard that 100% linen has the same issue as 100% cotton does, where it can be pretty hard in your hands to work with, but linen yarn creates the same sort of rustic look as linen clothes have. I'm trying to think now of all the other plant fibres that I've worked with that I can speak to, and I have worked with like a 50% cotton, 50% acrylic mix. I've worked with a 50% bamboo, 50% polyamide mix, but I don't think any of those had very particularly unique properties that I can impart to you. From my experience, polyamide tends to be the softest of the synthetic fibres, and apart from those rogue few blends, I think that is every yarn fibre type that I've ever worked with that I can tell you about. If you relate to the feeling of overwhelm that I described at the beginning of the video, please don't worry about it too much. Like, you will learn with time. Ravelry is an amazing website and resource if you want to look at specs for a specific yarn. Before I buy a yarn, half the time I'm looking on Ravelry at projects people have already made with it, so I can see what it looks like and look at their comments, see if they've said anything specific about the way that that yarn acts. And if there's any massive topic that I have left out of this that you think would be useful to add, do let me know. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope it's been some help, and thank you to Bob and Brad for sponsoring this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!